I work at National Consumer Law Center, been there for 22 years now. It's a low-income law and policy advocacy group. We're based in Boston, and it's cold here, I can tell you that. But in any event, that's where our home office is. We have an office in Washington, D.C. as well. There's an energy and utilities unit at NCLC, but the organization also works on a number of other issues that are important to lower income households, including housing, student loans, bankruptcy, the finance world. But we come at those issues from an economic justice and a racial justice perspective. And so in any event, I just want to start with this notion of energy security. To us, that's sort of the foundation of the work we do at NCLC. We're interested in affordable access, uninterrupted access to service. So it's affordability and access that sort of drives our strategy. And what we mean by energy security is this notion of uninterrupted access, but there are a number of metrics that we look at to understand the extent to which that objective is being realized. And some of those metrics are disconnection notices and involuntary loss of service when the utility shuts you off because you don't have enough money to pay the bill. But also, there are energy insecurity metrics that have to do with foregoing necessities, other necessities like food and medicine, clothing, in order to stay connected to the system. And we also see evidence of households maintaining unhealthy temperatures indoors, either too hot or too cold. And when this occurs, that's not energy security. Even if someone doesn't get disconnected, if the indoor temperature is unhealthy and poses a risk to health and safety, then that's not energy security. So we also assume that just by way of disclosure, it's just where we're coming from, but utility service and home energy service generally is a basic necessity and right. It should be a basic right. If you are energy insecure, there clearly are threats to your health and safety, others' health and safety. If you lose your electricity service and the fridge goes out, you've got spoiled food. There are many housing situations where if you're not connected to utility service, and this is particularly the case in some low-income subsidized housing, but if your utility service goes out, you're subject to eviction. And of course, if you don't have lights and heat or cooling, the kids aren't going to do well in school. You've got to have, and these days, access to broadband requiring electricity. You've got to have broadband to participate effectively in this society. So anyway, those are just some assumptions we start with. And now comes more the opinion part. But when you look at traditional regulatory principles, the cost of service principles that exist in regulation, cost causation principles, pure economic efficiency principles, resistance toward any what are called cross subsidies, we see that what could be considered the public interest today doesn't really suit that model. Today, following up on some earlier comments, we need decarbonization and we need a reversal of the inequities that are baked into the existing system. You know, when regulatory entities were set up and the public utility franchise model was set up in this country around the turn of the last century and a little after, the public interest really involved electrification itself, at least for electric utilities, obviously. So, you know, and that was a fairly narrow view of the public interest, but it was important. We didn't have universal electricity service. Well, we are closer to universal wires and access now, but affordability problems and the need for clean energy need to be put front and center in terms of determining what the public interest is. And so the point of all that is kind of the pure economic model of utility regulation needs to change to explicitly encompass those ideals and those objectives associated with clean and affordable. And that's going to require some reforms of performance metrics and the way utilities are compensated, and the ways in which regulators approve or disapprove utility investment proposals. So moving on here. I think the next few slides, it's just, maybe this is stating the obvious, but there are inequities that are baked into the existing system. The burden, that is the proportion of household income that goes for either electricity service alone or home energy services more broadly, obviously varies by income, household income. The electricity burden is that proportion of income that goes toward the electricity bill. So you can see this is just simple arithmetic, but households at the lower end of the income scale, assuming they're using consistent, these households are using consistent amounts of energy across the income spectrum. You see there's just tremendous disparity here. A household with income over $100,000, this is Connecticut data from 2 years ago. They were spending 1.9% of income to keep the lights on and in their case, perhaps other luxuries going, whereas a person below the poverty level would have to devote nearly 30% of income. So, you know, the question arises in my work. I do interventions in utility cases. I'm fortunate to be able to do them around the country and work on a lot of important issues. But the question always comes up, well, you know, why are these people always late in paying their bills? And I hear that term, these people, all the time. Believe me, it's not happy. But anyway, what you have to do in an evidence-based proceeding is to show and give data-driven analysis that shows why people are sometimes late. And you know, what is the justification for affordability programs? Well, I like to bring in evidence from an analysis group that deals with something they've created called the self-sufficiency standard and the self-sufficiency wage. And This is a group out of the University of Washington, and what they do in states and counties around the country is they calculate for different household types and in different geographies what it costs just to make ends meet. You know, what it costs to pay for food and housing and transportation, daycare, if you're a household type with a child, a young child, all the other necessities. And this calculation of a self-sufficiency wage or income, there's no trip to the ice cream store with kids. There's no going out to a movie. There's certainly no vacation. You know, this is all the most basic necessities. And you can see that in Connecticut, this was 2019, for a household with one adult, one preschooler, and this is, this is the single mom example, you see that the median self-sufficiency wage, that minimum amount to get by in the state, while there's variability county to county, the median is $55,300. So what you can do is convert that to a ratio of income to poverty level. What is the poverty level required just to get by in Connecticut? And it's, I mean, it's over 300% of the poverty level. So what we do in these cases is then say, well, how many households in Connecticut live below 327% of the poverty level? And it's a lot. So there are ways to bring real data, real evidence in to just show, even though we shouldn't have to show this, you always have to be wary of or be ready to show why some folks, juggle their monthly payments and might be late on that utility bill sometimes. A little more data from Connecticut. This is the what's called the arrearage rate that, and I looked at 60-day arrears. Arrearages mean past due balances on your utility account. This one's Eversource, the other big utility in Connecticut. But the blue line in this trend, in this series, represents general residential customers who don't participate in low-income programs or any other means-tested programs in the state, according to the utilities records. And the red line, in Connecticut, they call them hardship customers, but basically this is low-income folks who already are participating in either a bill discount or low-income home energy assistance. But the arrearage rate is 3 times higher, for the most part, than their higher income counterparts. And going back to that previous slide, we can see why. Similarly, the average dollar value of those serious arrears in the Eversource service territory in Connecticut are over 3 times higher than the general residential customers. And by the way, in looking at this stuff these days, you got to go back and look at the data pre-COVID to really get a clear sense of long-term trends. So what are some other evidence of the ways in which inequity is baked into this traditional cost of service utility system? What are the outcomes that we see by race and by income? And the next few slides draw on data from the Residential Energy Consumption Survey, which is conducted by the United States Department of Energy Information Administration every several years. It's unfortunate it's not conducted more frequently, but I'm going to show some of the national results from the most recent survey, which was conducted in 2015. The 2020 panel is coming out shortly. But if you're interested in looking at energy usage and expenditure and housing envelope characteristics, appliance characteristics, this really is a rich data source, and you can cross-tabulate a lot of different variables to start gaining a good understanding of what's going on in the field out there. But this slide shows frequency or shows, yeah, the rate of loss of heating service due to affordability problems by race. And the blue bars represent all households surveyed, and the red bars are exclusive to those. It just sorted out the records with households with income of less than $20,000 a year. So this isn't a full control for income, but the results are pretty disturbing. I think it probably would surprise no one that African-American headed households lose service more frequently at a rate higher than that of their white counterparts. Well, and what the argument, the counter I hear to that is, yeah, well, there are more low-income Black folks. And of course that is true. We have not only income gap, but wealth gap that is really, that plays into this. But when you partially control for income, even looking at households that are quite low income less than $20,000, the disparities persist. And this points to problems that run deeper than traditional cost of service regulation is comfortable going and looking at. You know, there are systemic issues and problems that are behind these numbers in these graphs. And that's another thing, if I can just back up for a second. I tend to deal a lot with numbers and data, but it's always so critical to bear in mind the extent to which these numbers, we're talking about people here, and to, you know, ensure that whenever we're looking at data sets like these, to remember that. And it's maybe too easy to forget sometimes, but it's really important. Where you see missing bars, it's just because there was insufficient data for in these particular cases. But looking at loss of cooling service, you see pretty much the same dynamic. And by the way, looking, and this is race, I have other analyses dealing with ethnicity, but looking at some of these race disparity charts and data sets, you know, tend to focus on white and Black headed households, but the disparities we see with respect to Native people, with Indigenous people, are just astounding and stark and very, very troubling. But you see the same dynamic, even when you partially control for income. You see that African-American headed households and Indigenous households lose service more frequently than white folks. Is this the racial wealth gap? What else is going on here? Is it societal issues with housing? And, you know, I mean, this is a question I could perhaps pose to you. What's behind this? Oh boy, I've got a few more of these and I'm going to try to speed up here, but another energy insecurity metric arguably involves the frequency with which households forego basic necessities to keep the lights on. And we see disparities by race that are just unmistakable. And by the way, this is just households at or below $20,000. So again, this is partially controlling for income. This is disconnect notices. You see the same dynamic. I've got tons of charts like that. So if you're ever in work where you need some of these, just let me know, and I've got plenty of them. But I think in order to do advocacy in this area, it's important to start with getting utilities to report data on disconnections, arrearages, notices, the extent to which folks are paying late fees, how many payment plans were offered and how many failed, what the terms of those agreements were. So in any event, a lot of this starts with this advocacy work does start with data, and there's around the country, many utilities are simply not reporting this data publicly. They know who they're shutting off, but getting access to it is another thing, and that's often a struggle. But to kind of advance that concept of data reporting and collection, I would suggest it's really important to get some geographic granularity here. At a minimum, we got to have zip code level data. So we can overlay that data with census statistics on race and income, and begin to get a clearer picture of the disparities that exist. So what I did in this recent case in Connecticut was we were able to get zip code level disconnection data. I did overlay that on the American Community Survey race and population data, and created a ratio of disconnections by zip code, and that just involved summing up the disconnections over time, and dividing that by population, and then you build a big database, and you can sort and rank the zip codes both by the percent of the population that are people of color, and I also included Latinx people in this, but you also can sort and rank the zip codes with the highest disconnection ratios. And what again, this isn't surprising, but the results are that we see this not just in Connecticut, but in other jurisdictions where we've been able to get this level of data reporting. And I don't know how well you can see this, but again, unsurprising, but very disturbing results. This yellow column, these are among I forget exactly how many, I think there are 200 or 300 zip codes in Connecticut, but these are the top 20 zip codes with for disconnection ratio. Here's where the disconnections occur most frequently and in the highest numbers. And then you can also sort the non-white population rankings. And in this case, what we saw was a very strong correlation between race, ethnicity, and service disconnections. Some of you stats gurus can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think 0.774 coefficient correlation coefficient is pretty strong. Oh yeah, there are 248 zip codes in that service territory. And among the top 20 zip codes with the highest disconnections, 12 are in the top 20 zip codes with the highest population, people of color and Latinx. That's that's pretty disturbing. And I think it's pretty strong evidence of the inequities that are baked into this system that's supposed to be colorblind and income blind, and but the outcomes in the traditional system are just unjust, and they're not right. So let's move on here. How long have I been talking here, Kavian?
Oh, John, you're doing great. By all means, take your time. This is very enthralling. The pace is perfectly paced. Do your thing.
All right. Well, thank you. And
no problem. And I'm keeping an eye on the chat. So when we get to the end, we can go back and ask questions, but feel free to continue just going, and we'll bring the questions that people are posting in the chat back to the forefront whenever you finish.
Okay, I appreciate that. I can't see my chat box right now, but I'll keep going. I'm going to focus for a little bit on bill affordability programs that lower the for income eligible utility customers, lower that bill to a more affordable level. Many states, I'd say 30 or more, have some sort of bill assistance programming. California has long had them, but other states do as well. And just want to talk about those for a little bit. Because the reason here is that if utilities are going to come in with proposals to make investment in grid modernization or in an energy supplier wants to put in a proposal to retire a coal plant and put in a wind farm or a solar generating facility, there may be bill impacts associated with that, at least in the short and middle terms. And we need programs that ensure that folks who are already disadvantaged in the existing system aren't put further behind as we transition to this, to the needed transition to cleaner energy. So I do want to talk about bill affordability programs that are a key component of that endeavor. And so this is just some sort of summary objectives that should be in designing such a program or reforming such a program that ought to be considered, I would suggest. First of all, we want to serve as many as possible of the utility customers who are eligible to participate in other existing low-income programs like the fuel assistance called LIHEAP. And in a state like California, I believe the income eligibility guideline for that federal fuel assistance program is 200% of the federal poverty level. It's still a low income, but I think these programs, as we're looking at them, we got to see, well, how many of those customers can we serve? And they need to be designed and funded so we can serve as many as possible. So obviously another objective is we've got to lower that energy expenditure or energy burden level, in this case an electricity burden level, to a more affordable level. And another key design component involves sort of comprehensiveness. Most programs that exist today might discount the existing bill a little bit, but they really don't do anything to help folks who have those, we saw the charts earlier about customers with past due account balances. So program design, if we want to bring the total expenditure down to an affordable level, we have to come up with a way to deal both with that current bill and the past due balance. The way it usually works now, even a low-income household receiving a discount on their current bill, if they are in a payment plan where they're paying off a $500 or $600 or $700 past due balance over a few months, well, their total payment isn't affordable anymore. So we've got to tie these two pieces together and make sure that the payment is, the total payment is affordable. And one model for dealing with this arrearage management issue, as it's sometimes referred to, is provide an affordable payment on that current bill. And for each timely payment on that current bill, the customer has a proportion of that past due balance just written off, just wiped out. And if we had a little more time, I would love to get into it, but the utility system is better off when that happens, even though there's the non-participating customers may be footing the bill for that arrearage write-down or that arrearage retirement. We see customers involved in a comprehensive program paying more in total than they otherwise would have, and which reduces costs that all utility ratepayers pay in terms of account write-offs and credit and collections expenses and all that sort of thing. So moving on, these programs need to be funded through a mechanism that is reliable, is sufficient to meet the affordability objectives associated with the program, and that's really predictable. And this is where the struggle really occurs when you're advocating for new or better programs, is how you're going to pay for it. And I think in order to be reliable, sufficient, and predictable, a program that's not funded through voluntary contributions or even through annual legislation needs to be considered. And the mechanism that works the best, in my view, is you put a volumetric charge on all customers' bills, including commercial and industrial customers. It's just a little kicker on your volumetric charges, and the funds go toward these programs. But as you can imagine, that's where the struggle really that's where it happens. You can get people, sit them down in a room and come up with a general program design, but the fireworks start when you start talking about how you're going to pay for that design program. And finally, we need efficient and effective program administration. You can have the best program in the world, and if it doesn't get out the door and people don't know about it, or if the administration is botched up, or if it's really inefficient and expensive, that runs counter to the overall objectives of the program. So there are a few program models that are predominant in the US right now. One is called a percentage of income payment plan. And what this involves is you look at each applicant or each participating customer's income and the number of people in that households, and you cap their payment at a certain percentage of that income. There are 7 or so states that have PIP programs currently. Illinois is one, and I believe they set that bill cap at 6% of the household's income. Nevada has a program as well, and it has a more aggressive benefit level. What happens in Nevada is actually pretty interesting. There's a state agency that calculates the median burden of households in the state each year. And for electricity, total home energy, the median burden level in Nevada is currently about 2%. So the statute that set up this Nevada PIP requires that the benefit level for participants be set at that median burden level. So it really is a very good burden, a good aggressive benefit. The problem in Nevada, though, parenthetically, is that the funding source for that program is somewhat limited. And so, that objective of serving all or as many as possible of the LIHEAP eligible customers, they're not able to do that so you've got a great benefit level, but more limited participation. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. But anyway, back to the script here. A PIP is different than a sort of a flat percentage discount in that it really is tailored to a household's income based on that affordability cap or income cap or bill cap as a percentage of income. And those households that are at the lowest end of the income spectrum benefit relatively more than households at the higher end of the income scale that participate in the program. Another good thing about a PIP is, if you think about this, if we're going to tailor we're going to cap the bill at a percentage of income, households are held harmless as rates go up. And we are in an environment across the country right now where there is upward pressure on rates for all kinds of reasons, some of which have to do with the transition to clean energy. And in the long term, I would hope that we'll be better off economically with renewable resources and better energy efficiency. But the investment required to get us there could raise rates. And at least in the short and middle terms, rates could be higher than they otherwise would under business as usual in the fossil system. So a PIP is a great mechanism for holding low-income folks harmless as that transition occurs. Now, on the downside, a PIP is administratively complex. You've got to get information from every household that's participating or applies to participate, what their annual gross household income is and how many people live in the household. And then you have to calculate what that bill cap is. What is that 6% bill? And so that's a calculation for every single household that applies. And that's a lot of complexity for a large scale program. But another model, which really is administratively very simple, is just a flat percentage discount. And California has these right now, and they have for 20 years or so or more. But you just, it is sort of as it sounds. You take a percentage off of the total bill, both the fixed and volumetric charge on your undiscounted bill, and you get your discount. The thing is, now this is not targeted, so a household at 50% of the poverty level gets the same percentage discount as a household at 200% of the poverty level. And so the burden reduction benefits are not as great unless you have a very high percentage discount that, you know, a PIP will give you, give those households at the lower end a better benefit. There's a hybrid approach called a tiered discount. And that really, it tries to take some of the administrative benefits of a percentage discount and combine that with some of the benefit targeting attributes of a PIP. And this is my current favorite. Been working on proposals for these in a number of different states, and the interest level is growing in this approach. But what you do, rather than looking at the looking at each in, you know, setting a separate bill for every single applicant, all you need to do is get the household income level and the number of occupants in that household, and you put them in an income tier. For example, 0 to 50%, and then 50 to 125, and then 125 to 200 as discount tiers. And you calculate what the typical expenditure is for all residential customers, and then you can calculate what the discount rate is for each tier in order to achieve that a target burden level of say 5 or 6 or 7, you know, whatever percent you choose. So that wasn't a very good explanation, and I should have a slide that illustrates this a little better, but you don't have to set a separate bill for every household. All you need is pretty much the information that you would get from a household applying for a straight percentage discount. Yet you get, you know, the households with lower incomes get a higher percentage discount than those at the upper end of the income eligibility scale. Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and very quickly talk about another tool in the toolkit, and that has to do with the consumer protection framework. And every state in the country has established regulations that deal with how a utility provides or can deny service, you know, what information the utility has to provide to customers. There are rules on security deposits or other advanced payments for service, regulations with respect to late fees, some very important ones that deal with prohibitions against disconnection or termination of service, and when a utility has to restore service. Oh, and then there's also, we talked a little bit about payment plans earlier. A lot of the protocols for the administration of these aspects of service are set out in regulations adopted by state agencies that have to be adhered to by jurisdictional utility companies. Now, as electric service in particular becomes increasingly important, it's arguably important for these policy provisions to keep pace with the technology and economic changes that are ongoing in the industry. Looking, for example, at disconnection protections. Many states, well, not many, but actually only a handful have effective regulations that prohibit disconnection if a member of the household, the customer household, has a very serious illness. And other states prohibit disconnection during certain harsh weather months of the year or when temperatures become extreme. And as as climate events become more frequent and more severe, climate change events, I should say, these protections really need to be re-examined, and we need to ensure that they're robust enough to meet the intended purpose of, there's a universal service ideal that's out there that's behind these protections, and yet the effectiveness in most states of these provisions is insufficient to meet this need. So we could talk for a long time about consumer protections, but I'm going to move on. Clean energy tech. This is such a key component of a just transition. We need to distribute energy efficiency technology and home energy usage technologies and other technologies in ways that don't pose financial risk to low-income households. So, challenge number one is just ensuring access to technologies and home energy improvement that is necessary in this transition. But some objectives, I think, in looking at proposals involving clean energy technology for low-income households is we want to make sure that that these programs enhance cash flow for folks who don't have enough money already to make ends meet. And there's a lot of discussion of loan programs and other financing models to that may not result in a lower overall payment in the low-income household. So this is a challenge that we need to ensure that households that participate in these programs, they come out ahead financially. Cash flow in low-income households is really where it's at. It's day to day. It's less of a calculation about long-term investments and long-term savings. Monthly cash flow, we need to ensure with the rollout of these programs, whether they are traditional weatherization, building envelope programs, or installation of heat pumps, or choose your technology. I think this principle really needs to be front and center of the discussion, and it often is not. We know that upfront payment requirements for energy efficiency don't work in low-income households. They're if you're struggling to make ends meet, buying that next bag of groceries or the kids a pair of shoes, it comes before you're going to buy some insulation for your walls or ceilings. And spoke a little bit a moment ago about financing risk. This really is a huge topic, and it's controversial. So many of my clean energy friends see financing as the way to get energy efficiency into renter households and other low-income households. But if positive cash flow can't be guaranteed, I think this is really problematic, and we need to find other funding mechanisms to ensure that low-income households can benefit from new and energy efficiency technologies. And finally, there are other tools in the toolkit that I'm not going to talk about here, but community solar, concerns about participation in public forums and in planning for for distribution of vehicle charging, and there are a lot of other aspects to this puzzle that need to be discussed. But oh, I'm about out of breath here, and you are probably fast asleep out there. So I'm gonna stop there and unshare my screen, I suppose. Here. Okay. I hope you're still awake. I've been droning on for a long time, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
No, John, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and all of that knowledge that you have. So by all means, thank you so much. We do have quite a few questions in the chat. And so I guess I'll start there. And then if we have time for more students or more participant questions, we'll get to those as well. So let's start with the first question that we got from, I think you addressed this on the spot about data being missed from Christy. I think one of the bars was missing and you addressed the fact that that was a data being omitted. So for the next question from Laura, we have, do you think that the ACE or the ACE, American Council for Energy and Efficiency Economy, estimate that 25% of American households are energy burdened is an accurate estimate? So that's our first question.
You know, it's a great question. But I mean, think about what energy burden is. It's that proportion of income that gets devoted to home energy expenditures. And I would have to take a look at sort of the benchmark that what ACEEE uses to determine energy burden. You know, I think they might use 6% of income. If you spend over that for home energy, you're energy burdened. I'd have to go back and look at their good reports. But you know, I think it's a little more complicated than that, because I'm going back to that self-sufficiency standard. You see folks over 200% of poverty that in some cases over 300% of poverty that don't have enough money to make ends meet. So for them, is 6% affordable? Is that an affordable burden for them? So I know we use, and I use it a lot too, this concept of energy burden, but what constitutes affordability it's a complicated question. And you know, even going back to those slides that look at disparate outcomes by race, you know, you look at the Caucasian-headed households under $20,000 getting shut off less frequently or losing service less frequently than their counterparts of color. And so, you know, it doesn't completely control for income, but it does partially. And so there are other factors, you know, so maybe for that low income white household, 6% can work. But they also may have some savings or some equity or you know, something that constitutes wealth. And we know there are tremendous wealth gaps by race in this country. And so to just say, okay, 25% are burdened is, I think it's useful. It's kind of a useful tool, but it would just encourage, you know, suggest that there's a need to look a little deeper beyond that concept. But 25%, you know, I think that, you know, depending if they use a 6% expenditure level, I'm sure it is around 25%, maybe even a little higher.
Thank you so much for that answer, John. I have one more for you, and then I actually have a question to follow up. So from Eugene, we have you seen positive examples to address the split incentive problem in rental housing? Is the next question.
Yeah. Oh boy, it's an age-old problem. It existed long before this all turned white. I'll tell you that. It has been around forever. And just to, I'm not sure whether we need this, but the split incentive is where you have rental housing. The landlord obviously owns the property and is responsible for upgrades to the building and oftentimes purchase of refrigerators and other equipment, but the tenant pays the bills. So that split incentive in it, you know, if it say going back to the refrigerator example, you know, why is the landlord going to care if they have an energy efficient refrigerator? Because that tenant's paying it. There's no financial immediate financial interest of the landlord, and the tenant is left holding the bag. And the reverse of that, of course, is the tenant isn't going to go out and buy a new refrigerator, even if they have the upfront cash, if they plan on leaving in a matter of months. So that's the split incentive concept, I think, simplified. But how do you get at that? And I think there are a couple of ways, and there are a couple of ways that are being looked at that are popular right now that don't make as much sense. So first of all, what I do think can work is better codes and standards. If you are a landlord and you have renters, you should be required to have building envelope tightness at a certain level. There need to be better standards for cooling and heating equipment in rental housing, as well as refrigeration. So that's part of it. Another is has to do with, and this already happens with the Weatherization Assistance Program, which is the federal Department of Energy program that delivers no-cost improvements for low-income owners and renters. But through that program, since this is a complete 100% payment, yeah, nobody has to come up with money up front. And we need to be able to increase the funding for that program, but also enhance the way that outreach is conducted to landlords, saying, hey, you know, you should go along with these improvements. You don't have to pay for it. Your tenant doesn't have to pay for it. Now, there is a provision in the Weatherization Assistance Program that says the participants have got to, you know, their financial situation has to be enhanced. So you could include there not only this better outreach, but, you know, put forward provisions where the rent has to stay stable. If the landlord's going to get these free improvements to their building, you know, that the rent stays stable for a certain period of time. It's a very difficult question. At some point, I think as a society, we just need to go out and buy energy efficiency and buy clean tech the way utilities purchase power. You know, but now I think a lot of folks are looking at tariff on-bill financing as a way to deal with the split incentive, Kavian. And I've got some reservations about that. The reason is the way that this is a program that's touted as a means or a structure that's touted as a way to get at this split incentive issue. And the way it works is the administrator of that program or a contractor or some entity like that approaches a tenant or you know, it's not just for renters, but in the case of renters, they'll approach a tenant and say, okay, we will install improvements X, Y, and Z. And if you, and this will be paid off through your utility bill. The proponents of this say it's not a loan because you don't need a credit check and all that sort of thing. But there is a repayment obligation, and that repayment obligation is on the utility meter. It's not on the customer. So if tenant A accepts improvements and then moves out, tenant B is then responsible for making those payments. And a lot of the proponents of this model say, well, the energy savings will outpace the repayment. The energy savings will be greater than the repayment. But ultimately, unless there is regular monitoring of the performance of these improvements, and there are no significant changes in household composition from tenant A to tenant B, you know, that there's really not an ironclad guarantee that there will be positive cash flow. So, and another issue with that is I would really be wary about a program where an obligation falling on tenants should otherwise be met by the landlord. You know, and so it's very difficult because historically, low-income energy efficiency and weatherization has not been rolled out fast enough. We're not going fast and deep enough with these programs. And I think some very well-intentioned folks are looking at this on-bill financing model as a way to shake things up. And I'm not a just say no person when it comes to that on-bill financing or tariffed on bill, whatever you want to call it. But we really need to be careful, I would suggest, so that there aren't unintended consequences. And the last thing I have to say about that is it really is essential that the contractors not be the entities that are marketing this program, this type of program, because their incentive is just to sell stuff, right? And to do their work. And hey, that's what they got to do. But there needs to be an independent entity that not only markets the program, but also monitors the work that's being done and can monitor the savings going forward to ensure this positive cash flow and ensure quality work and ensure the measures that are being opted for really make sense. So like all of this stuff, it should be simpler, but I wish it was.
Thank you, John, for that thoughtful answer. We appreciate it. We have one more question. Christy has her hand raised. So Christy, go ahead and ask John your question about you.
Yeah, thanks, John, for coming in. You kind of touched on what I wanted to ask about, which was outreach. So I was really interested when you were talking about the percentage of income payment plan. But I think specifically when you get to Nevada, you spoke about limited funds. And something that I noticed is that when these kinds of, I guess, benefits or plans are made, they often benefit people that they weren't intended for more than the people that they were intended for. So for example, something like affirmative action. So how do you, how do you prevent that from happening? Or when you're looking at these things, like, is there any sort of mitigation plan to make sure that further disparities aren't happening?
Well, if I understand the question correctly, I think in the case of a percentage of income payment plan, there's kind of a means test associated with it. And there are various ways in which that test is conducted, but in most jurisdictions that have a program like that, a household needs to present documentation of what their income is. And so it doesn't just, I think the benefits are indeed restricted to those who meet income eligibility guidelines. And I don't know if that's where your question.
No, I guess that makes sense. I guess in general with all these plans, so maybe not just with the PIP, but like, okay, so with outreach, I think a lot of the times people don't know about these things, and they don't know how to actually apply for them, and that they can apply for them, and that there is help out there. And so often it is people who, I guess, have more access to does that make sense? And so like
No, I
you're,
understand. I'm sorry,
yeah,
I misunderstood you.
I don't think I don't think I said it very clearly, honestly.
No, you're fine. In any event, I think I understand now. There is a tremendous problem, actually, around the country in getting information out to households who could benefit from even if a program as well as to benefit from such programs. We've really seen this during the COVID pandemic in this country. Even as the federal government rolled out benefit programs for rental assistance and utility assistance, for example, in so many states that money is just sitting there. And there is an information access problem in some cases. The lack of ability to move around in the ways that applied earlier, and hopefully that's changing, but that's made a difference as some brick and mortar community organizations and service agencies have been shut down. There are language barriers. Increasingly, people in this country don't speak English as a first language, and materials are often not translated well. There are broadband access issues. If you've got to submit a stack of paperwork, except all electronically, and navigate very difficult systems, that comes into play. We've seen a lot of anecdotal evidence of newcomers to the U.S. Becoming increasingly wary about accessing benefits for all the wrong reasons. And so I think there's no single answer, but we do know what you're raising is a real problem. And we've actually seen during the pandemic, counterintuitively, enrollment in some energy assistance programs decline, even as we see increases in poverty and unemployment. And so these barriers that I think you're hinting at, they're very real. It's I just wish there was a simpler, easier silver bullet here, but it seems to be a lot of different factors that are in play, and that as we rethink other aspects of program design, it's so important to keep those aspects, the outreach, education, the application process well in mind. One last thing that comes to mind, again, California has some low-income utility discount programs. And the process in California involves self-certification. All you have to do is submit a sort of a document, either electronically and paper, to the utility company specifying the number of people in your household and your gross household income. And if you fall within the eligibility guidelines, you're in, you get that discount. And what also does happen is that I'm not sure exactly that the utilities use some algorithm or another to decide how many of these and which of these applications they're going to quote audit or double check on to require more documentation. But the hurdles are very low, and the participation rates in the discount programs in California are very, very high. I know it's a shock, but they are. And you know, whereas in most states, you gotta, you know, go and be ready to get a little blood to sign, you know, before you get your benefits. So, you know, and there's this paranoia that, oh, people are going to cheat, and there are so many schemers and scammers out there. But the administrative cost and the lack of participation associated with putting up those barriers are tremendous. And there's no evidence in California that I've ever seen over a long, long time that self-certification process results in fraud and abuse and whatever the terms are used these days. So thanks for the question.
Thank you so much.
John, thank you so much, honestly, for the thoughtful responses and all into your excellent wisdom and knowledge that you're imparting to us. We really appreciate it. You do have one participant from NREL who did reach out, or he's going to reach out via email, who's interested in talking collaboratively if they're interested in, or they're specifically interested in doing some research, answering questions centered around energy burden and insecurity. So I put your email that you posted earlier just in the chat. So any participants that would like to talk to you offline about your research and any possible synergistic research that you could do between different organizations, that's available. But I think we're coming up on time. So I do just want to send a heartfelt thank you, first of all, to you, John, for your excellent presentation. And to all of our participants that were able to, you know, come through today and participate in the energy seminar yet again.
Well, thanks a lot, Kabian and Jess, and for all you folks who stuck around. Really enjoyed talking with you. Hope to talk with you again sometime, and good luck with the seminar.